Back, and we are now specifically going to look at this query and this question of monitoring counter threats. What is this idea of monitoring counter threats? How does this move when we're talking about a specific kind of blunder where the blunder isn't there until we make the move, making it possible? How can we prevent these blunders? And we're going to look at some of the tips and tools that we can do. And the first tip I can give you is playing online. Both Lichess and chess.com allow you to change the setting so you have to accept the move. So you make the move and then you can click accept, which is a wonderful tool in the longer games that you can use. The point of that is to carefully look, play the move, and then look if there are active moves that you've missed. And that's the big focus I want you to put in this training session. We're going to focus on looking a little bit ahead in a position and asking, what active moves does my opponent have? If I play here, what active moves does my opponent have? Because a lot of the blunders, the mistakes we are going to see come about quite simply because players are missing to look for the new active moves that might be possible because of the move. It's those consequences of the move that exists. So let's get into the simple definition of what we're looking at a perfect example. So let's take this position and let's ask the big question here. Who do we think stands better in this scenario? This is very important. We need to just stop and ask this question. Who do we think stands better? So just pause the video. Try and think. White's last move was to move their queen to c3. So we can assess their threat. It is black's move. Clearly, but black is better. Black here has extra material, a pawn, but more importantly, black has the pieces more orientated to the center and better control. So I want you to think here, what type of options can you find? So let's look a little bit for some candidate moves. So hopefully you paused the video and you looked a little bit at what options there were for black. And now we're going to get something very, very unfortunate for black at least. Black's move that they intended to play and then went and played was this move, pawn to e4. Because why? They saw in this position, look, I'm protecting the bishop, so they did assess that I need to protect the bishop, and I'm attacking the queen. And unfortunately, they forgot to ask the question, what active moves, if I play there, what active moves does my opponent have? And this is specifically the kind of MCT blunders we talk about. It's specifically missing the opponent's opportunity after you've moved, because queen takes g7 doesn't exist as a move here. It's not a move unless black plays pawn to e4. So what black should do, and a wonderful tip I can give you, is to imagine and say, okay, I'm about to play e4. Just for a few seconds, you do this. I'm about to play e4. Are there any active moves that my opponent could do I haven't seen? Any checks? Oh no, that's checkmate. Oh no. Oops, okay. I can then see in that situation, I should not do that. So this is a very simple beginning, but it shows us the tip that just for a few seconds, just say before you play your move, imagine in your head, if I play this move, are there any active moves that my opponent has? So just take that tip. Now, for those of you playing in-person tournament games, this will help a great deal where you've had a little bit of a think of a position. Before you reach out and play your move, you just sit and you look and ask, if I play there, are there any active moves I might have missed? In the past, under FIDE rules, you were able to write in your move prior to playing it. That would help a lot. Now, under FIDE rules, you cannot. You can still try it and see if your opponent complains. But certainly, those of you playing online, I suggest in the longer games, change your move so that your settings, so that it asks, are you going to accept this move? That way you can see the move, and when you see it, you need to ask, are there any active moves I might have missed? And you will avoid so many of these painful blunders like this. It will help a great deal for a lot of you. Here we have, in my mind, the most unfortunate demise of the tournament. This was a really unfortunate scenario for black. This game was filled with intrigue and interest. I think black was now desperately trying to win because they had such a good game. And then, unfortunately, in this position, black was now concerned in their head. I suspect they thought, if I move my king away, my opponent would trade queens and I'm going to take here. Or they could have been just looking for a square to get to a check to. But here, black still needs to do what is required for the position, and they needed to stop and ask, okay, if I play here, what active moves does my opponent have? Because all of you look away for those of you who are a bit squeamish, because after this long battle, over 70 moves, black played the very unfortunate king b4. Oh, painful, unfortunate, and certainly at least white was happy. And how do we avoid this blunder? Again, prior to moving, just before you move, you can ask, what active moves does my opponent have? Oh, they're going to take my queen. No. I do not want to let that happen, and that's very, very important. So that tool, it's just a few seconds, just before moving, just trying to look on the surface, what active moves does my opponent have? Very, very important. So let's start extending a little bit of this concept of understanding of possibilities. And if we take this position, again, a very interesting contest that we have here. Black has just moved their knight, threatening the bishop on f4. So white fully recognized and said, that is the threat. How do I deal with this threat? Well, I want to move my bishop to an active square. So here as a training tool, I want you to look at this position. And now, as white, I want you to try and find 3 active moves. Just 3 options for the bishop. So just pause here and try and think, what 3 options might there be for the bishop? Okay, good. So hopefully you've written them down and you've looked what choices might exist. And then we can then discover how the blunder happened for white here. Because if we look closely in this position, bishop to g3, bishop to e3, and bishop g5 are all 3 moves for the bishop. Certainly, it would be a possibility to go g3, but we wouldn't want to really weaken our king in that kind of way just yet. So all of them are different candidates. And here, white wanted to play a little bit more active and put more pressure on, so they were drawn to the move bishop g5. Now, what white should have done, they've recognized the opponent's threat, they're preparing to deal with it. They should have asked and said, if I play to g5, what active moves does my opponent have? So I want you to imagine now in this position you're playing white, and you're going to go, okay, if I play bishop g5, what active moves does my opponent have? And I'm sure some of you have already found it and can figure this one out. Maybe you can put it into the chat. I think type in the move. What active moves does black have? Well, it's not a capture. There's no checks. But unfortunately, there is queen a5. And this is exactly what happened in the game in this type of position. And now there are real problems going on. Because this is attacked. This is attacked. And this type of active move, notice, it didn't actually exist. It wasn't so dangerous in this position. So, for example, if they played a move like bishop e3, queen a5 is not so dangerous in this position, not at all. White can comfortably deal with this problem. Now, how do we avoid these kind of blunders? Well, first of all, is this tool that I want to arm you with, that I want to train you in this session, which is prior to making your move, just for a few seconds, you ask, are there any active moves for my opponent? And try to look for those active moves. But the other feature as well is to also try and keep a running count of loose pieces. The famous expression, loose pieces fall off. And here, white should recognize and say, well, my knight is not protected, so let me be careful. So that can sometimes also help you in games where you're just looking for loose pieces for yourself and your opponent. And then you can also ask, well, what options does my opponent have and how can they attack it? And this could have definitely been avoided in this position. And then unfortunately, there just isn't a good way to save material in this position because of the multiple attacks that exist. So, for example, bishop takes f6, and then again, bishop takes f6, and now we have two pieces attacking the knight, plus the poor knight cannot even move anywhere. So it's not even like they could sacrifice the exchange because the knight doesn't have many good options in this position. So it's interesting how a good position where white has nothing wrong with their position, it's very playable, can turn so bad so quick if we miss a little bit of a detail in the chess position, which is so important. So if we take now a little bit more complexity here, okay, this is an intriguing position we have here. Let's try and assess who do we think stands better. We're playing here as black, and let's try and think a little bit. The opponent's rook is now on e3. How do you think we can play in this position as black? So hopefully you've had a good think about the position and thoughts about what possibilities there could be, about who's better and how black could play. Clearly something that is important here is, look, white is better. We can't change that fact. But here's another example again of the monitoring counter threats tactic. In this position, black, I suspect, wanted to target this square, and then, or they were concerned about this play on the b file. I think a good plan for them is certainly actually to go knight a5 and trying to get a knight into that square and work on that. That's a good plan. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because if the knight moves to a5, we go, okay, if I'm going to play knight a5, what active moves does my opponent have? Oh no, they've got check. I cannot do that. So therefore, I would need to do something else first. So knight a5 is not possible. And here, unfortunately, black went and played b6. And then there is something that I want you to imagine in your head. I want you to imagine and say, okay, I'm playing black. I want to play b6. What active moves does my opponent have? Well, the problem is loose pieces fall off, so that's something else we can also look at. We can recognize, the knight would be loose. The opponent then could play knight f4, and I would be in trouble. Unfortunately for black, they didn't see this resource, and now after b6, the knight moved into f4, and then after queen g5, we can happily just take this piece on c6 with no real problems at this stage. So a wonderful example of, again, just monitoring those threats, because this is a difficult position for black to play, and that blunder came about because in this position the knight is not loose. It's only due to black's move that the knight then becomes a loose piece and then falls off the board. So let's grow the complexity of decisions here. This is a very interesting one because black went on to win this game, but there are some big moments here that one needs to be aware of. First of all, let's try and assess this position. We always need to try and get our bearings and try to think how we might continue. We're playing black. Who do you think is better or worse? And try to find what might be 3 moves you could go forward with. So hopefully you've paused the video and looked a little bit at who you think is better or worse. And I think if we look at the position, black is to be preferred just a little bit, due to the fact that black is slightly ahead in development. So white has to make 2 moves still to develop. Black, on the other hand, has 1. Also, black has developed rather freely with their bishops with nice activity. White's bishop still has a little bit of work to be done to getting in. So here, if we talk about candidate moves, I certainly think that pawn takes d5 would be good. The idea of removing or leaving white with a isolated pawn. So if the knight were to capture, the knight captures back, pawn takes, and okay, I think black has got a slightly better position. Otherwise, in terms of candidates, I suspect that we could also look to push c4, but that takes more risk because then we lose the pressure on the center. Here, when we're talking pressure of the center, black wanted to play queen b6. Now, who of you found that move? You can put that also in the chat maybe, because with queen b6, it's certainly interesting trying to pressure the center, developing the queen. But if we play queen b6, we need to stop and ask, what active moves does my opponent have? That's a big deal. And this is a perfect example of the danger that does exist, because after queen b6, there is an active move. Put it in the chat. Let's see who can find that white's active move that they actually missed here as an idea. It is knight to a4 with the threat on the queen and the threat on the pawn. Now this is important. So queen b6, white actually missed this, and I think also white on their side either underestimated the effectiveness of this knight move or plain missed it. But it's very important where white in reverse should have asked, okay, my opponent played queen b6. Why did they play there? What does it do? And here it presents that opportunity to go knight a4 and attack both of them. So very important moment that we can grow with. So then there's another big moment in the game. Here, a good decision, because they played queen takes on c5, which is basically, if we look, the best move. Now they played knight a4, so they did recognize the move. And then we get this moment where the queen moves to a5. Okay, that works wonderfully well. Then the bishop moves to d2, attacking the queen. So black makes a good decision and gets their queen out of the way. All very good. And then we get this big moment here, bishop c3. And black does another good thing and recognizes and says, okay, why is my opponent playing there? What does it do? Well, they want to take and they want to double my pawns. I don't want that to happen. No, thank you. So they decided to play queen e7. It's okay. This is a fine move. Nothing wrong with this move. And now we get a fascinating moment, because here I want you now to think in this scenario, if we are playing as white. Okay, we flipped it around, same position, but now we're thinking from white's perspective. So we're just changing it around a little bit. As white, what active moves do we potentially have? And then let's try and pick out some 3 candidates here for white of what we could potentially do. Hopefully you've paused. Hopefully you've looked a little bit. And now when we look at this position, some of you maybe have picked what white also did here, where white played this active move of knight g5 in this position. The idea of knight g5 is rather clear. They wish to threaten bishop takes, and then they want to go bishop takes check. But white should have asked, what active moves does my opponent have? Now I want you all to look exactly that. If white plays knight g5, and imagine the knight on g5 there, what active moves does black have? And crucial, for those of you who should have found it, should recognize when we're talking about active moves here, hopefully you took a bit of a pause, you've had a nice look, and with knight g5, the active moves are rather simple for us to pick up and see. There is, of course, bishop takes h2 check. Now, bishop takes h2 check is a big deal. How does this work? Well, if the king takes, knight g4 check, and oops, there is a discovered attack with the queen on g5. So very important moment and a very sharp battle that ensues here, where when we take a close look, one needs to recognize these tactical chances. And if they play bishop takes check, if the king moves back to h1, then white is threatening again to take and then play check. So black also needs to deal with the fact that white wants to play g3 and trap in this bishop. So black would need to move their bishop back and resolve this issue. So here we have a very sharp process. And how does this come about? Well, there's 2 factors. The first one is, as I've advised you, as soon as you're thinking about playing the move and you've made your decision, just say, in my mind's eye, if I play there, what active moves does my opponent have? And that'll hopefully help you to find. Remember, when we say active moves, we're talking checks, we're talking captures, we're talking simple threats. And here specifically, it's interesting because, again, bishop takes h2 check Doesn't make any sense in this position. It's only due to white's mistake, white's oversight, that knight g5 then allows this problem. The battle gets very sharp after that, because then we get bishop to g4, which is quite fascinating. And now we can actually flip it round and do a little bit of our training tool earlier, because here in this position with bishop g4, now it's black that has blundered back, because now we need to stop and ask the question from white's point of view. Okay, what and why? Why did my opponent just play bishop g4? Well, they want to attack my queen. So what does the move do? Well, it threatens the queen. It also places the bishop in line with my attack against them. So that's very important. So that's an opportunity. And now we stop and ask and say, okay, what are the consequences of this move? That allows us to find this very nice tactic of bishop takes f6. And then the point is, if they are to capture on our square after we trade, then we will simply take their queen. And after all of the trades go off, black now has a deficiency, because we are looking at the active moves again. So bishop takes e7, and then we would say bishop takes e7, and then bishop takes check, and then the king would move, and then the rook would take here on d1. And now we can see that white is going to be up material in this position. Very, very nice, which is great. They're going to be 2 pawns up, because if the bishop takes, they can, if they so wish, take here for an interesting game. So instead, black said, no, I want none of that. I don't want queens off the board. So I'm playing g takes f6. And now we get this attack. Queen takes g5, pawn takes g5. And again, very important. This is where we get, for white, now a great position after black had missed their counter chances, which is so very, very important. Then we get into, because as you can see, white has a good position, and yet white is the one who lost. So queen f5, pawn to f6, queen takes check. This is all very good. The rook moves to f7. Fine, nothing wrong with this decision. Then they put their queen back on f5. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the plan, getting the queen to continue to keep pressure against the enemy king. Now the opponent played queen to e5. And here we get a strange moment, because white is a pawn up, so they can definitely consider trading. Instead, they decided to move their queen to h3, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with this move. Then this is great work from black, because black asked, well, why did you move your queen here? What does it do? And this is important. You want to get into your opponent's head. So this is a very important move from black, where black took note that, okay, yes, you're defending against h2. Yes, you're no longer trading queens. But, aha, I see that you want to get your bishop onto the square. Very, very important. And then we get this crucial moment where the king moves to h8. Nothing wrong. Rook a to d1 would have been fine. Here they took a piece away from their king, which is a little bit peculiar. And here is the big moment. Pawn to g4. Very clever from black, saying, I'm threatening your queen. That is the piece that is protecting. And then white forgot to ask the huge question. Yes, they were starting to run short of time. But this is when you've got shortage of time. The first thing you need to do is ask, why did my opponent do this? What does this move do? What are the consequences of the move? Well, if I take here, what active moves does my opponent have? Oh, check. No, I have no interest. I should play queen h4. And unfortunately, they took on g4, and it's a wonderful example, again, of just those simple questions that I want to arm you with, of how you can find better moves, how you can increase your chance of preventing blunders. Very important. So if we take now a more complex contest, here is a fascinating situation. White had just previously pushed pawn to e5, driving the knight up to g4. So black now creates this threat. White then moves their rook to e1. Here is very important from black. This is where we need to restore our thinking process. Why did my opponent play there? What does the move do? And of course, what are the consequences? Now, the first thing is, why did they play there? They want to protect the pawn in this position. So with them, they want to protect the pawn. Great. But the next question, what does the move do? It doesn't just protect the pawn. It creates a threat. So if we give white the move, what is the threat? So take a little time here and figure out what is the threat from white. And well, it becomes clear. The threat from white here is this pawn move to h3. So black must immediately do something about it. They have to deal with the threat on their knight in this position. That is the most important feature. So whatever they do, they have to deal with that threat. So now our whole position needs to change in terms of our decision making. I want you to think a little bit here. How can black deal with this threat? White is playing h3. How can we deal with the threat? So find 3 candidates. Take a little bit of time. Pause the video here. Try and find 3 options into how do we deal with the threat. Okay, so hopefully you took a little bit of time, and here we have an interesting moment of how to deal with the threat. Here in this position, I would say the best one is to place one of the 2 rooks onto d8. And it shows that when your opponent's making a threat, you don't have to play a simple move to refute it. There can be complexity, because how does a rook moving to d8 deal with the threat? Well, we are now overworking the opponent's piece. So this is getting into the position where we're creating a new threat and improving our pieces. And this is what you want to try and do in a game when you're trying to deal with the opponent's threats. The first question you want to ask is, can I prevent their threat? And can I do it while improving my pieces, making my position better? And this is a big deal. So pawn to h3, now we would capture. This is a problem, because if they were to capture, we capture back. If they capture with a rook, we now play rook takes d2, and black has a wonderful position. Their bishop is active, their rook is on the 7th. Wonderful. So certainly after rook d8, white would probably have to play rook d1, and now we need to rescue our knight immediately. So we would have to play h5. They would play h3. Our knight would go back. And okay, we have a contest. We're not really anything drastically down. And this is an interesting fight. I think it's a great contest between the 2 sides. Unfortunately, here in this position, black didn't see the threat or didn't recognize the danger with the threat. So black here played b5, which is not terrible, but puts their position more at risk. Bishop f1, and here totally missed the threat of what happened with rook e1, rook hf8. And that's the unfortunate part, because now they lose a piece. So here we can see again the importance of this process of asking what and why. Even here, if I play my rook hf8, we could still ask and discover, if I played rook hf8, what active moves does my opponent have? And then we could potentially see h3, because there's no captures of significance. There's 0 checks for either side. So very interesting moment that could have been improved upon. Now we get into the some highly complex contests in this position. This is a very interesting battle of the to and fro, because here again this process needs to be applied. Here, if we look, white now plays this move of black has just played knight g7 to f5. And there's 2 issues. Let's go through this thinking process. Right at the beginning, white needs to ask, as they did, why did my opponent play there? What does the move do? And they missed part of this, and they didn't really expand what does the move do into what are the consequences of the move. Yes, certainly it does threaten h4, but what else does it threaten? And that's very important. Now hopefully you can start seeing, well, yes, actually it's threatening knight takes d4. This is an idea. White should have strongly looked at this idea and carefully examined what was going on. And here in this position, white then decided, I don't want to trade the knight, so I'm going to play knight g2. What white should have done here is actually to ask again the big question, If I play knight g2, what active moves does my opponent have? And it's such a simple question here, actually, because there's no checks. And in terms of captures, it's all to do with the knights. So white then should have asked and said, if I play knight g2, what is the danger with this move knight takes d4? Well, I can take back with a pawn, the knight will take, then I'll move my queen. Oh no, then they're going to go check. And just by that simple examination, white would have realized very quickly, I don't have a choice in this position. I need to defend f4 again, or I need to trade off. And it meant that the candidate moves are either knight takes on f5, knight back to f3, or this knight across to f3. Those are my options. And knight g2 is not a move. Instead, unfortunately, they played knight g2, and then black was in the game here. Knight takes check, and wow, this is a very, very difficult situation. Even at this moment, black, I think, rushed a little bit and forgot to look at options, because in this position, if we take a close look here, after the knight has captured, when the queen moves, white played queen b2, and black could have really made white's problems go from bad to worse, because we can talk about what are the consequences of this move. Yes, we have knight takes e2 check, but actually there is even better here, because of course we have pawn c3, and that would be tearing open the position. The poor white queen would be in a terrible, terrible state, and this would be great. But nonetheless, this is a great position, and we can see this is very, very strong for black in this position, and they're doing very, very well. So after this, there was a fight back, a very interesting contest, and black went on to, unfortunately for them, lose this game. So finally, I want to end off on this spectacular game, and this is where adapting the thinking process, even in very sharp positions, and when I say sharp, I mean positions with a lot of checks, a lot of captures, a lot of simple threats. Both sides have got a great deal of things going on. Here we have a big contest here, and a very, very interesting situation. So let us now talk about this situation, because white played rook e1. Let's look here from the perspective of black. Let's say we're playing black, white has just played rook e1. We need to stop and ask ourselves the question, okay, first of all, who's better, who's worse, what is going on? Well, it's not at all clear, actually. I would say that it's a very imbalanced position. I think black is better, but we can immediately see black has got a substantial problem, which is their king. Their king is wandering around in the wilderness here, in the middle of the chessboard, in danger. So if black can solve that problem, black is doing very well. Why? Because white's king is also in danger. So very intriguing position. Now with rook e1, black needed to stop and ask and say, well, okay, why did my opponent play there? Okay, this is interesting. Why? What does the move do? What are the consequences of the move? Well, okay, he played rook e1. Does he want to take on e3 check and try to get to my king? Maybe he does. Maybe that's his intention, his threat. So we need to immediately look. We give them the move and we say, if you play rook takes, I would take back with a pawn. The queen would take check. And my king would then maybe move down to f8. It's a very dangerous position, but okay, maybe I do want to prevent that. What does the move do? Notice why your opponent might move somewhere and what does the move do are sometimes two different things. And in this case, it pins the knight. So we need to say, what are the consequences of the move? Well, it pins the knight. So in this position, we need to say, well, okay, what am I going to do? What are my candidates? And along the way, black decided they wanted to play queen f4, which is reasonable, because the idea there is, look, if my opponent wants to take, I prefer to prevent that. The knight is a wonderful piece on that square. And black needed to ask and say, well, if I play my queen to f4, what active moves does my opponent have? And I want you to look carefully, and then we can actually see bishop d5. Is it the end of the world? No, but it's a difficult move to deal with. So what black then would turn around and say, well, actually, if I go queen f4, they're going to go bishop d5. I don't want that. So what moves can I do to deal with this threat? Well, I could play queen e5. That seems rather obvious. That holds onto this square. Or I could play rook c5 and deal with that threat, which is so very, very important at this stage. So this is a tough battle. Okay, it doesn't change the fight, but now after the bishop gets in, black still is a little bit better off, but it's a tough position. The rook moves across, we have check. Black has to block with d6, otherwise they can end up in a great deal of trouble. So the queen comes to a5, and as we said, the king needs to be found a shelter. So here, black does a great job. Black says, okay, my opponent has just played queen a5. What are they threatening? They want to go queen c7. And black makes it their immediate plan of action to say, I need to solve this problem. I need to deal with this problem. So I want you to spend a little bit of time here. It's not easy. And think, how are we going to solve the problem of queen c7 check? What options do we have here? So hopefully you've taken some time. This is an incredibly sharp position. Why? Because black's king's in trouble, white's king's in trouble, and there's no clear way to rescue it unless we find the correct plan. We need to find shelter for the pawns, and here is the critical moment. So black finds this very nice move, king f6, dealing with the opponent's threat. Very well done. The bishop moves to e4, and black says, well, now I've started my plan. I'm going to send my king to safety because it's the one problem I had. So queen to c7, and he says, well, what is your threat? Okay, you want to play queen here check. I can deal with that with the rook blocking in, so I'm sending my king in. Every single piece, all hands on deck, all pieces are involved in the attack. Queen e7 check, king h3, and suddenly here we have black solving the problem, that their king is now safe. But it is a desperate situation because they're short of time. So queen h7, and now we get such an intriguing moment with queen h7. Okay, why did my opponent play there? Because they want to take here. What does the move do? Well, it threatens the pawn, it defends the bishop, it also pins it onto my king. Okay, what are the consequences of this move? Well, the queen's out of play. Okay, so what could I do in this position here? How can I play? And here, unfortunately, when we look at this decision making, black plays the worst move, simply missing a difficult problem. Black intended to play pawn to h4, and it's not easy to see why this is the worst move, well, besides a blunder, but the worst of the candidates, shall we say. But pawn to h4, why is this such a problem move? And it all comes down to the fact that suddenly white jumps into the opportunities. What black should have done is played queen e5. This is an easy move to see afterwards, looking to centralize the queen and then start attacking using the rook and the queen to get involved. But with h4, white does a brilliant job here of saying, well, what is the negative of h4? What is the consequence of my opponent's move? Why did they play here? Oh, they would like to push g3 at some stage. Maybe not now, but very, very soon, they would like to play this move. So in this position, white played queen to d7, and this then becomes a very clever move because they said, I'm going to pin this pawn, and now suddenly black has got a drastic problem to try and fight against. Black has to try and solve this problem of how do they deal with this pin on their position. Why? Because the pawn is pinned and this is pinned. So immediately black needed to turn around and say, okay, why did my opponent play there? Well, rook takes f3, that's their threat, that's what they want to do. What does the move do? Well, it pins my pawn. What are the consequences of the move? Well, my king's about to look very silly if I don't solve this move. And unfortunately, they didn't find that they had to play knight f5, the only move. We have to try and break this pin. And here, okay, we would still have an ongoing contest, because if the bishop were to take, rook takes, and now it's a very interesting attacking opportunity for black. So well done on white on finding this moment here, because after black played d5, then simply rook takes check, captures, bishop takes, rook takes f3, and unfortunately here, it's not completely lost yet. There's still some work to be done, but the crucial problem that we need to notice is that the white king is no longer in trouble. So I hope now with these training tools, I want to arm you with those questions again and remind you how we can deal with threats, how we can deal with opportunities from the opponent. Now, what I want to point out to you, which is so vitally important, is some tools. How do we train for this? Firstly, as I said in the previous video, one of the big ways to train for this, to recognize your opponent's resources and threats, is to do the puzzles with a flip board. Do especially the shorter ones. Short puzzles with a flip board is a very good training tool, because then you are training your mind to look for your opponent's resources and options. While playing your games, try to develop the habit that just before playing, ask yourself, if I play here, what active moves does my opponent have? That's very important. It'll help you to pick up and see the different kinds of possibilities that maybe your opponent can use before you might blunder. Then finally, a nice online tool is prior to change your settings, so you have to approve your move. And that way you make the move and it says, do you want to play the move? You can look at the position and ask, are there any active moves that I might have missed? Very, very important. So I hope that you have found this a good constructive session and learned a lot from these games and opportunities. And I hope you have a wonderful, enjoyable chess journey forward.